think about how we can apply that in our own lives. And so I'm going to do that kind of starting from a position of just having us think about what kind of goes on in our own hearts when we're confronted with the suffering of those that we care about, or with suffering in our own lives. And my hope in doing that is actually to make us feel more free and open to dealing with this. Like, I don't want this to feel like something where I'm going to say this is how we have to do something, because I certainly don't have that kind of insight. And I think sometimes, I know for me, when I'm confronted with very profound suffering, then I quickly add to that a sort of nervousness that I'm going to get it wrong. And so I would want us to hopefully diminish that in our time together, and but just be aware of what happens within our own hearts, because I think that's where, as Dr. Perry said, we saw Job's friends come with wonderful intentions and generosity and all sorts of goodness, and then it all kind of unraveled there as they started talking. So I think that gives us a clue that part of what goes wrong for us is just what's going on in our own hearts. Let me pray for us, and then we'll kind of start. Father, thank you so much for today. Thank you for giving us the book of Job, and for the people here gathered to learn, and for the people here speaking. I just pray that you'd use this time, that it would be helpful, that it would serve your purposes. We pray in Jesus' name, amen. My hope is that this can be a discussion, so I'll leave time at the end, but if you have a question, please just, or a concern, please just bring it up, because I know we're coming from kind of a variety of backgrounds and reasons that we came, so I want this to be helpful. So kind of, as I said, I think we're going to start with sort of what are our tendencies when we encounter suffering. And then kind of maybe pausing and noticing which of those tendencies are likely to be helpful and which of those tendencies are likely to be unhelpful, which can then help us kind of look at where do we need God to grow us, or where do we need to kind of receive comfort ourselves. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some pitfalls we can fall into, and what we might do instead. And then I'm going to touch briefly on what to do when we've been comforted poorly. I think a lot of us have maybe been in that situation too, where we've been suffering and we've been missed. And so we carry that. And then my final thing I'm going to talk about, which I think is really important, is how do we repair? I loved Dr. Perry's slide. Like, we will get it wrong. We will get it wrong from our own willfulness and just not being willing to take other people's perspectives. We will get it wrong from being misguided, and we will get it wrong from doing what we think is exactly right, and it just lands really poorly for the person, and it's not really anybody's fault, it's just what happened. So repair is our friend, because that's what can help. And so we're going to talk about that at the end. But at the beginning, what I would love for us to do, I'm going to read you a quote that I find very disruptive, but that has helped me a lot, and that is from Dr. Dan Allender. It's from The Healing Path, and the quote is this: "To be powerless does not mean we can't make decisions or respond to situations. Rather, to be powerless is to be unable to erase the damage and paint the good that we so deeply desire." And so I want us just to sit with that quote for a minute, because I think for me, the first time I read it, and when I come back to it, I think for me, a lot of places that my heart gets tangled is when I am trying to erase the damage and paint the good I so deeply desire. This especially can come out as a mom. Just I can do things, and my kids will tell you that is not something that they enjoy when I am in that place. But I think when we get to that place in our hearts, it's really hard for us. And so I want us just to take a minute, and if you think about kind of what brought you here today, whether that's a community that you care for, loved ones that you care for, suffering that you've gone through in your own life, kind of whatever brought you here today. If you kind of think about that, and think about what happens when you're confronted with our human insufficiency to erase damage and create good in all of the ways that we want, I want you to just think of what your tendencies are. And maybe try to think of, hopefully we've all got a few healthy tendencies, so maybe try to think of one or two of those, and let's try to think of a couple that maybe we have found are problematic. Are there handouts somewhere at the back? I think not everybody got one. Great. Would would anybody be open to sharing one or two tendencies that they find? We can start with some helpful ones. Does anybody have a helpful tendency that they have when they're confronted with powerlessness? Yes.
I like to be with other people. Like I don't like to be alone.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. That's beautiful. So connecting with other people and not being alone when we feel that powerless feeling. Could we get maybe one other helpful tendency that somebody has before we move to? I'm sorry, what? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, yeah. That's a great one too. So thinking about, we are powerless in a lot of ways. We want to be powerful, but also we have wins. It doesn't mean we don't have influence. It doesn't mean we don't do things well. It doesn't mean we don't bring good into the world. How about a couple of ways maybe you find that you struggle and that you go a little off balance when you're confronted with suffering and powerlessness? Uh-huh. Avoidance that's one of mine. Yeah. Avoidance, denial, pardon? Isolation. Hmm. Yes. Yes. Hmm. Yes. Yes, yes. So we might overfunction. We confront the thing that we can't fix, and so maybe we find a different thing to go fix. Or I like to really research things that I can't fix and find out a lot of things about the things that I cannot fix. And then on a bad day, I will inflict all of that research on the suffering person, and that's not helpful. There might be timing. I mean, part of this and why we're talking about it as a wisdom dance, right? Like there might be time when some things that we know are helpful. But that's not all the time, and that's not usually first. So that's part of the dance that we have. So thank you guys for sharing and just kind of talking about this, what happens, because I think it's really important for us to notice our tendencies, because like I said, all of us are capable of just being kind of in our own world and not open to others. But a lot of times I think we're really trying to do the right thing, but we lose our balance. And so knowing our tendencies can help us be prepared for where we're likely to lose our balance, so that maybe more frequently we can course correct a little more quickly. So in counseling, particularly in one of the modalities that I use called emotionally focused therapy, one of the things that we talk about a lot is intent and impact. And the trickiness of that in human relationships, because often our intent is really positive and the impact is not. So a very simple example from home, let's say that I have an 18-year-old son, that I would like to properly navigate his way through community college. And so I might say something such as, hey, I noticed classes are starting in 2 or 3 days. Do you have that all settled? What is my intent? I want him to get ready for classes and do well. What is the impact? You always think I can't do this. You won't trust me to finish it myself. And now we're in kind of a quandary, right? And that's a pretty simple one. There's no intense suffering. There's no brokenheartedness. This is just, normal Tuesday at the Werner house. So it gets harder when we're then bumping up against when people have like the hardest things that they've had to deal with. And we take our good intent and our impact lands poorly. And so some reasons that we might get it wrong. Sometimes fear. Sometimes we're as afraid of the situation that we are helping someone go into as they are. Maybe sometimes we're more afraid of that situation than they are. And in our fear, maybe we go to whatever our strategy is to manage that fear. Sometimes we have a right desire to instruct. It's not a bad desire, but it's not a helpful one usually. Maybe we've been there and something worked for us, and so we want to tell them. Or maybe we know things, but it's usually not helpful. So then my third one is just sometimes we're just trying to help, but we're not. A lot of times too, I think we get nervous with people we love very much when they're in that wrestling place that Dr. Perry described, when they're really agonizing with the Lord, when they're putting words to what's true, when they're putting words to their deepest questions. and we kind of freak out. And we're like, oh no, what if they're not trusting the Lord? What if their relationship with God is in jeopardy? And so we kind of rush them through the process because we want them to the other side where they can say, I know that my Redeemer lives, and they're not in the midst of that wrestling. Sometimes our own emotional capacity is just limited. Sometimes we are called to weep with those who weep, and we are weeped out, and we don't muster it because we're kind of empty ourselves. Sometimes I think we get it wrong because we have a difficulty holding two truths at once. And so a lot of times we get nervous when people are rightly wrestling through the very real difficulty of what they're going with. And we're fearful that that erases all of the good, and we feel like we need to help course correct them. And that often lands in a very misattuned and poor way. So a very simple example that is not this can certainly land in even more painful places, but my simple example of this is my husband has cancer. He has for about 14 years. Often we deal with that by just not thinking about it if it's going well, but we periodically have these scans where we assess, we learn how his cancer is growing and what he's going to have to do. And when we have these scans, then we usually send the text out to the extended family and let them know. And we have one very dear member of the extended family who loves us so much, who will without fail say how amazing it is that we have such smart doctors, and it's wonderful that they can find this, and how amazing it is that they know how they're going to treat it. And I hate it, and so, because it's not time yet. She's not wrong. It's true. We live in the Siteman, you can't find smarter people. We couldn't live in a better place to have cancer. We are so thankful it's not spreading more. We are so thankful they know how to treat it. But sometimes we need just 5 minutes to feel sad that the treatment is happening again, to feel bad that it's not going away. And she, from a very good-hearted place, cuts all of that off. And so what we do is we usually don't say anything until about 2 or 3 days after we've learned it. Because by that point, we're all geared up and we're ready for what she's going to bring. And that's okay, and sometimes that's what we do with the people we love. We just learn how we're going to walk this together. But because we're here to talk about how to not get it wrong, that piece that Dr. Perry's talking about maybe some curiosity, maybe holding off our thoughts, is really helpful to create space. Particularly, like I said, this is a pretty easy one for us in some ways. We're used to doing it, but we can get into places that are really hard for people. And I think we can also get into places, particularly as American Christians, we like things that are going well. We like things that are resolved. We like things that are moving in a positive direction. And that can inadvertently kind of crowd out people who are suffering. So you may have been in a place, you may have talked to a person who can't go to church at Christmas time because their loved one isn't there. Or maybe you've been in that place, or they just struggle in those ways. And I think a lot of times that's because we haven't made room for those people in our traditions, in our way that we talk. It's something I'm very thankful for at Riverside. I feel like our pastors are so helpful to always bring out that what a day is like for one person may not be what that day is like for the next. And I think that's so important that we bring room for that. My daughter was invited to a bat mitzvah, and I don't know if this is normal, but it was my favorite thing I've ever seen. The family danced around the circle and did all this joyful stuff, and then they all stopped, and they named all the people who weren't there and all the reasons they were sad that this event was happening. And I thought that was so beautiful that they could hold both and give those people space to hold both. This is a joyful day, and it's a sad day. So that's what we want to do. And sometimes our own trust gets us tangled up, right? Our own doubt gets us tangled up. Sometimes people are wrestling with really hard questions with suffering, and that bumps up against my really hard questions about suffering, and I'm not ready for that. And so I kind of step back. Maybe I give advice. Maybe I placate. So I have another Dan Allender quote that says, "Genuine trust involves allowing another to matter and have impact on our lives. For that reason, many who hate and do battle with God trust him more deeply than those whose complacent faith permits an abstract and motionless stance before him. Those who trust God most are those whose faith permits them to risk wrestling with him over the deepest questions of life. Good hearts are captured in a divine wrestling match. Fearful, doubting hearts stay clear of the mat." And I don't know for you all, but I know for me, sometimes when I'm walking with someone who's really suffering, what that exposes is my tendency to stay clear of the mat. And that's just something we're just human. I mean, we can't help it, but that's something that if we know, we're more likely to learn from Job's friends and not make these mistakes, which we're going to talk about next. So why did they do such a good job when they weren't talking? Let's have some ideas. Why did that go so well? Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's great. It was about being with Job at that point. Wasn't about them. They were there at cost to themselves. What are some other reasons it was going well in the silence? It's what Job needed, right? We learned that his whole world is unraveled. He is disoriented. He is not ready for words. There are no words. And so, yes. So there's times when our silence is useful and important, and they did a great job. And then I think, like many of us, particularly maybe American Christians, they hit their wall maybe. And like, this should maybe be getting better. You know, are we waiting too long? Should we progress? I think at least that's a struggle often in our context. And so then, broad brushstrokes, you know, that is where they began speaking on behalf of God, instructing, saying things about God which are maybe true, but which imply that this is Job's fault, which was not true. And sometimes I think that's another risk we run when we start speaking for God, is because when a person is suffering, when we are laid low, our tendency is always to ask why, and our second tendency is to think it's probably my fault. So we want to be wise with our words, that we're not saying things that can imply that. Rather than offering an explanation, or rather than silver lining, I think that's a close cousin to offering an explanation, right? So that's kind of what our loved one does with the cancer, right? So on the day that we're like, it's back, he has to do treatment again, well, at least they found it. Yes, they did. And we're thankful, but it wasn't time yet. So Brene Brown has this statement called silver lining. And it's not wrong or untrue, but it's the timing's bad. And it makes there not be room for the person. So rather than that, we can have some humility, we can have some silence, we can have some curiosity with the person. We can even voice sometimes, that's so hard, I don't even know what to say. But I'm so glad you told me. Sometimes that's enough. Instead of instructing, we can have curiosity. We can ask questions. We can make space for what they are saying. I think a lot of times people who are suffering just need to say what's going on and have someone see how bad it is with them so that they're not alone. Otherwise, they're just alone thinking all of this, you know, but we hear the things that they're saying and we feel so scared. And so we try to, you know, rush them out of it. But what that means is then they're just alone with it later. So if we can say even like, wow, these questions are so hard, even I even feel things as you say it. That's going to give us more ability to stay with them. Rather than defending God, we can invite questions and we can wrestle together. I have been a part of groups where as people are wrestling and the suffering person has been given space, there is a time when a person can say, you know what, I will pray for that for you. I have faith for that, and it's okay if you don't right now. That's very different from, God means this for good, and Romans 8:28, and kind of, you know, that's a really different stance. Both are calling forth the goodness of God, but the one is saying, I'm going to come alongside you, and it makes sense to me that you can't see ahead, but I'm going to try to be here with you and see ahead for you. Rather than, sometimes we have contempt or judgment for those who are suffering. Sometimes when things are going well for us, we think, along with Job's friends, well, they must have done something. Or maybe sometimes people are suffering and they did things. You know, maybe they partly brought it on themselves. That happens too. But again, if we know our tendency, we can ask questions. We can offer support. We cannot confuse, I think another one that's hard for particularly some of us who are Presbyterians, emotion doesn't necessarily mean they're sinning or not trusting God, you know, but we like things to be orderly and well thought out and footnoted, and so we just get nervous when everyone's really emotional. And so, and that's just okay. But knowing that, we can maybe stick in with the emotion a little bit longer. And then the final way we can really miss it, I think, is we remove our presence. We just are inactive. We don't want to say anything wrong, so we just don't say anything. Or we don't want to bother them, so we just don't do anything. And I think if you talk to most hurting people, they will say to you straight away, I would rather have someone say something stupid than not say anything to me. And so I think, again, we can move towards, rather than inaction, action. Not forceful action, but maybe, hey, would it help if I did this? Would it be okay if I brought a meal by? I know you're really hurting and I don't know what to say, but I want you to know I'm praying for you. You know, would it be helpful if I came and sat with you? Because also when we're suffering the most, we can't think of what we need. So it doesn't really help to ask us that. But it also maybe, to Dr. Perry's slide, doesn't help to just run up and start doing things to us. And so a little more specified questions, I think, can be really useful for people. Do you want to talk about this, or would you like me just to sit here with you? These are the kind of questions that can make space for people who are suffering and get us out of the inaction trap of like, I'm just not going to do anything because I don't want to get it wrong, which then leaves people alone. And so a part of what I'm talking about baked into that really is just attunement. Just like try to stay with the person. And that is going to help us. If we're staying with the person, if we're praying, it's going to increase our odds. Our timing is not going to be terrible. It's going to increase our odds that we're maybe doing something that is helpful for them. But with that, repair, I'm going to go kind of quick because I want to leave space for questions, but repair is our friend. So there are people called the Gottmans who studied healthy marriages 50 years and longer, and what they found is that the most important skill is actually to repair. The reason is that we're not going to get it right anyway, so that's one thing. Even in securely attached human relationships, like securely attached parent relationships, where the child feels securely attached, no issues, the parent is all there, how often do you think that parent attunes correctly? Percentage-wise, just throw it out. 30, somebody got it right, yeah, 30%. So, I feel all kinds of things about that number, but I think what the number shows us is we better know how to repair because we're going to spend a lot of time doing it wrong. And so that, repair deepens intimacy, it prevents resentment, it prioritizes the relationship, and it manages unsolvable problems, which quite frankly is what mostly suffering is, right? Like, we're not going to solve it. And so some components of repair, own your actions. Again, curiosity. Can I hear how this impacted you? And it's okay to say your intent, but we don't want to say, like, it's different, well, I was only trying to help. That's not really owning your intent. I wanted to help you, and I can see now that me sending you 5 articles over email actually just made you feel guilty and overwhelmed. That's more owning your intent. So it's okay to share our heart for the person, but we want to do that in a way that still makes room for their experience of us. And ask if there's anything you can do to put it right. So with this, also, some of us are hoping to receive repair. Maybe we've been really poorly comforted, and so we're hoping to receive repair. And so with that, my hope is that some of this can help us think about that and to think that is hurtful when we're missed, and that it is okay to long for repair and to long for that to be put right. I think it also kind of helps our hearts to know people who get it really wrong one time might not get it wrong every time. And so it's some relationships are such that maybe you learn it's not best to rely on that person or that group, but I think often we can find that people who really are a mess in certain situations can kind of get better. And so my hope too is that we can have a little bit of space for growth on both sides of this dilemma. Space for growth for ourselves as we help, and also space for growth when we're the one wounded and we've been missed. I have some books at the bottom that have helped me tremendously. And so if you would like to read those. I noticed on the slide, The Cry of the Soul is actually written by Dan Allender and Tremper Longman, so I apologize to Tremper Longman for not putting them on the form. They're both there. But I wanted to leave, we've got about 4 minutes, and so I wanted to just leave time for questions or comments. So, yes?
As a counselor, I'm curious So I'm just curious, like how maybe you've learned this or
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is, how have we? How does this apply with counseling, where maybe, people are coming to us for a service. They're probably not expecting we're to sit in silence for the entire hour. That might not be the most helpful. But how do we kind of honor that need to create space? Is that a fair? And I would say for me, that is a learning curve, and it's also a little bit about attunement to that client, and so making space for what do they want to share, how fast do they want to share it, and then as they're sharing it, how are you with telling me this right now? Is this okay for you? Is it too fast? Is it okay that you're in this much emotion, or do we need to think about some ways to help you come up a little bit and then go back down into it? So it's a lot of just moment-to-moment questions for me is what I found to be the most helpful in helping people do that. And also just acknowledging, I get it wrong and I want you to tell me when I get it wrong. I think if clients are kind, forgiving people for the most part, and so if you can say, I know I'm gonna get it wrong sometimes, and sometimes I say stuff and it's just misattuned, they'll tell you. And you can say, thank you, let's redirect. So that's kind of how I go about it. It's a great question. Other questions? Yes. Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.
What are ways to potentially help them be comfortable? In my own experience, being with someone, having a sense of reflection
Mm-hmm.
that because one of the things I was going to say on that list at the beginning was, but I think you kind of covered it with the Allender quote, but this idea that like having the person I'm sitting with, the therapist,
Mm-hmm.
like kind of be not having maybe experienced that level.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
used to do hospice.
Mm-hmm.
Young when I did that.
Yeah.
And so, and also I've been on the other side too, where I've had a lot of grief. So
Mm-hmm.
how can we be curious and still be honoring of the sensitivity of it
Mm-hmm.
and or reflect?
Mm-hmm.
Two things I'm thinking about.
Yeah. So the question is, how can we be curious and still honor the sensitivity of the situation, and knowing that we're going to sit with people sometimes that have gone through things that we have not and can't imagine what that would be like. I mean, I don't know that there's like a perfect answer to that. I think certainly having some awareness of saying like, I want to be here with you and I'm with you, and I don't know what that's like. So sometimes I might have to be learning from you. I think that can be helpful. I know a really great counselor who's not a parent, and he kind of says at the first session, I don't know what I would do if I was a parent. And I just want you to know that. I'm going to try to help you do these things with relationship, but I don't know what I would do if I were a dad. Kind of clears it off. I think reflecting, I think saying what you're hearing, I think occasionally gentle conjecture can be helpful. Some people might feel like this. I wonder if this is happening for you. Those might be kind of gentle ways to help the person talk, other than just like asking questions. Or even saying like, gosh, as you say that, I feel the heaviness of that, and I don't even have the half of what you're going through. Those are all ways that you can kind of demonstrate that you're with them, that you're hearing. Does that answer your question? Okay. How are we? Okay, we've got time for another question or two. Yes.
So, my question is, do you have any thoughts or tips on what to do if you are, like with somebody in the grieving process and you're starting to see them develop maybe some like unhealthy coping skills or maladaptive tendencies? How do you maybe like, or do you even call those out, help them through that, and then how do you balance doing that while also validating for them like very valid feelings of suffering and pain?
Yes, that is a wonderful question. What about when we're sitting with someone and we do start to notice maladaptive things, and maybe we want to draw that out, but also we want to validate their pain? And I think that's a really valid question, because all of us feel that tension, right? You don't just want to sit with someone and the ship's going down and you don't say anything, So I think that's a really valid question. And I think it's really hard to do. And that's where like repair can be our friend too. The two things that I think about some are one, earning the right. So like if you've sat with them, if you've got them, if you're with them, your odds are higher. They're not perfect, but they're higher. If you can say, hey, I think our odds are higher if we can validate the intent of that. I know you're just trying to escape the pain of this, and that makes so much sense. And I'm wondering if there's a different way besides said harmful behavior, or I'm wondering if we can work together to find a different way. So I think, earn the right, validate the intent, validate your care for the person. And then I think we just kind of try to gently float those things, like, have you thought about this? Have you considered this? Like, I think it's just kind of a dance. And often it's just that what you said, I think, is really smart. It's the balance of, you make sense. I believe you. I get why you feel this way. And could we wonder about this or talk about this? And so it's kind of that balance of acceptance and change. Yeah, but that's a great question. And it takes wisdom because we don't want to invalidate people or force them out of their suffering, but we also don't want to sit alongside people we love and just not say anything if we notice things that are concerning for them. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that is a hard one. So the question is, what do you do when someone who's grieving also feels guilty, also feels bad, also feels selfish? And that is a hard one. And you're saying in this situation that you're describing, the person didn't do anything wrong. Okay, right. Sometimes we feel guilty and we did things wrong, but in this case, the person did not do anything wrong. So I think that is really hard. And so obviously, once you've explored with the person where that's coming from, where that standard is coming from, then I think maybe to try to explore with the person, if they weren't feeling that, what might be coming up for them. Because sometimes, although I wouldn't say this directly to a person unless I wanted to probably have them be pretty mad at me, is that sometimes I think in our own minds we start to feel guilty, we start to feel selfish because it still feels a little more in control than just how do I sit with this really terrible thing? And how do I sit with the fact that I can't ever love this person again on earth? Then we start to go back, well, I should have done this, I should have done this, I should have done this. So is that answering the question here? And so I might begin to ask them, like, what else might you feel if this wasn't in the forefront? What might also be on deck? Because like I said, what I just said to you, I would not say because that would go poorly. But in my mind, I would be starting to wondering, like, why is this person stuck right there? How does that make sense? What is that maybe doing for them? Not in the sense that they're getting up thinking, I'm just going to feel guilty instead of other things, but like, why is the needle kind of stuck on that group? Occasionally, too, you have to be careful with this one. Sometimes I'm curious how they think their loved one might respond to that. Sometimes I'm curious how they think God views them in that. You want to be careful. You don't want to be heavy-handed with that. Yes?
Can I comment on this?
Please.
I am a grief counselor.
Mm-hmm.
Grief is, guilt is part of the grieving process. It's a huge part. It's a necessary part. And so in my experience too, when someone is feeling guilty, we don't want to necessarily, it's not wrong. Even if they've done nothing wrong, sometimes they have to feel guilt of, if I had been there. It's kind of like, and so in my training, what I've learned is sometimes it's okay to just reflect back, like, so you're saying you feel guilty. Tell me more. Like, where do you feel that in your body? How does that come up for you? When you feel guilty, what else is happening for you? Let them explore the guilt, because it's necessary to feel that to get through that. Everything you said too is really good. But I just that's a little bit of a sticking point.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you bringing back to that. Did everybody hear that? Okay, yeah, that before we get to anything that I just said, guilt is part of the grieving process, so we want to give them a chance to explore that guilt, to express it, to say where it is in their body, to express what's going on, because guilt is one of those steps that they're going to move through no matter what. Which, thank you for catching that. That's actually really helpful. Okay, all right, thank you guys so much.